Hello and welcome. My name is William Couch and I'll be presenting this case study on Disney's Shanghai Disneyland resort negotiations with China. I chose this because of the fact that they had to work so hard in order to finally come to an agreement from multiple different aspects, from concept, creation, ownership, and even operation. Working with a communist government when your company's based out of a capitalist government can mean you might have to make some alterations to your product, and Disney definitely had to do this. So let's dive in. The positions. So let's set up our parties. On one side we have China, and on the other we have Disney. So Disney just wants to open their brand to a larger market and create a new park in Shanghai, China. While China wants this new company to enter their economy, and in order to give them a chance to have complete control over the brand and a large sum of the profits. So what are their interests? What does each party want? Well, Disney wants the profits made off of the 300 million possible consumers that are only within a 3.5-hour driving distance, not to mention all of those that drive in from further. They also want complete control over the creation and implementation of the park's process. So what does China want? Well, they have asked Disney to stop pushing for their Disney Channel. They asked for majority ownership of the park and a substantial amount of the profits. So let's take a look at a couple of the negotiation techniques that were used in this negotiation. Well, first off, Disney came out guns blazing, trying to get everything they normally get within the states. This didn't end up being very productive, as China threatened to pull the plug entirely. As a result, Disney used game theory to choose a weaker route in order to compromise. Yes, they wouldn't be getting as much of a profit as they originally intended, but they still would be getting a profit as opposed to none at all. I believe Disney went in hoping very much to get something closer to their BATNA, which was majority control and ownership and most of the profits, but ended up getting something closer to their WATNA, which was very little profits and very little control. Now, thanks to the new affiliation, China is actually looking into cracking down on their enforcement of counterfeit Disney products. This mutually benefits both parties as they share profits, and if one party loses, then so does the other. So I really believe that finding common ground and aligning themselves as partners for profit made this technique so successful. So, what went well in negotiations? Together, they were able to work to redesign major focal points for the parks that changed from their original concept. Being able to collaborate this productively on major changes is really a tough thing for any company, but especially for the tightly wound Disney company. The real takeaway from this negotiation is the fact that both parties didn't result to public disputes, and that's what makes this especially important. Since this negotiation went so well, it can inspire future negotiations and movements to proceed much more swiftly and effectively, like China cracking down on the Disney counterfeit products. So, what exactly went wrong in the negotiations? Well, China was strong and refused to back down on their demands. They kept full pressure on Disney at all times and didn't give much wiggle room for any negotiations. As a result, it forced Disney to move to a weaker position as China was threatening to pull the plug on the entire project. The negotiations, although kept mainly quiet, were far from a compromise, and it ended in Disney just fighting for scraps in order to attempt making it into mainland China before many of their competition. So now we've reached an agreement. In the end, the two parties did come to a conclusion and work together. Disney was able to break into mainland China, and China was able to gain majority ownership. They were able to come to the conclusion that China's government-owned Shanghai Shendi Group of companies would own 57%, and Disney would own the remaining 43% of Shanghai Disneyland resorts. The only way Disney agreed to this is by agreeing to create a third company together to oversee operations in which Disney would own 70% of that company. This was the compromise that Disney was able to wiggle out of China. This also explains why China is so much more interested in maintaining the integrity of Disney products. In the end, if Shanghai Disney does fail, then they would have the possibility to buy back ownership for a severely discounted price, or simply just suffer a smaller loss from a Disney perspective. In the end, I think both parties have benefited and will continue to benefit as they are more productive in the future. I'd like to thank you for joining me on our negotiation analysis, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.